You're listening to BQN. Assimilate the audio.
Good morning, I'm Chrissie De Clerck-Szilagyi.
And I'm Jason Szilagyi with today's Caffeinated History with the Szilagyis on the BQN Podcast Collective.
Before we jump into our topic for the day, we'd like to take a moment to thank our BQN Patreon patrons who make this show possible. With a monthly subscription of just $5 or more, you can join them and join our meetings of the Hive Mind on the second Saturday of each month. Watch your Patreon messages for details. Today's topic is the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa. The Republic of Indonesia is comprised of a group of 17,504 islands in the South Pacific and Indian Oceans. These islands are a result of millions of years of volcanic activity caused by the subduction of the Indo-Australian and Pacific tectonic plates beneath the Eurasian plate. It is part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, the name given to areas of great tectonic activity, both earthquakes and volcanoes, along the edges of the Pacific Plate. In addition to Indonesia, it includes Japan, the Aleutian Islands, and the west coasts of the Americas. As such, much of Indonesia is subject to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The most famous of these had a worldwide impact, the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa. The eruption began with earthquakes and venting in late May 1883. A more forceful eruption followed, beginning on the 16th of June, producing thick black smoke that essentially hid the island from view. When the smoke cleared on the 24th, 2 columns of ash were visible coming from the volcano. A third ash eruption began sometime between then and the first week of August, when it was observed by geographers, who also reported a half-meter-thick coating of ash on the island. Throughout these eruptions, nearby islands experienced small earthquakes and could hear loud booming noises coming from the volcano. The eruption reached its climax on the 27th of August. In the 2 days previous, the ash eruption had increased steadily, and small tsunamis were formed which hit nearby islands. Then, at 5:30 a.m. on the 27th, a massive explosion was heard and felt on nearby islands, accompanied by large tsunamis. A little over an hour later, another explosion. Then, at 10:02 a.m., the third explosion, one that was heard as far as 4,800 kilometers, or 3,000 miles, away. It is believed to have been the loudest sound in recorded history, with an estimated intensity of 180 decibels at a distance of 160 kilometers, or 100 miles. This explosion also produced a pressure wave that was read by barographs around the world as it circled the globe 3.5 times. The fourth and final explosion, slightly quieter than its predecessor, occurred at 10:41 a.m. and was accompanied by a massive landslide that took most of the island with it. The island's collapse into the ocean caused tsunamis that reached 30 meters, or 100 feet high, on nearby islands. The ash plumes reached 80 kilometers, or 50 miles, into the atmosphere. The volcano quieted by the morning of the 28th, but small eruptions of mud and ash continued into October. The eruption was, of course, devastating locally, with an official death count of 36,417. No one was on Krakatoa itself, but the 3,000 inhabitants of the nearest island, Sabesi, were killed by the pyroclastic flow. Naturally formed rafts of volcanic pumice washed up on the eastern shore of Africa as much as a year later, some bearing human remains. Tsunamis caused by pyroclastic flow destroyed towns on Java, Sumatra, and other Indonesian islands, and were felt as far away as South Africa. It also altered the seafloor, adding as much as 36 meters, or 120 feet, around what was left of Krakatoa, and it also temporarily added some land to nearby islands. But the most noticeable effect was on Krakatoa itself. About 70% of the island had disappeared, blown apart, and fallen into the ocean. Krakatoa also had worldwide effects. The ash in the atmosphere added to the clouds, which reflected more of the sun's rays, causing global average temperatures to drop about 0.5 degree Celsius, or 0.75 degree Fahrenheit, over the next few years. The summer afterwards saw record rainfall in many places that were usually quite dry, and more severe winters across the northern hemisphere throughout the rest of the 1880s. It also produced spectacular red and orange sunsets so vivid that people mistakenly reported fires. The climatic effects subsided by the end of the decade, but the idea of Krakatoa and the damage it unleashed has stayed in people's memories. A small new island volcano emerged in the place of Krakatoa in the 1920s, called Anak Krakatoa. It built itself up over the next century, then erupted violently in 2018, causing a tsunami that destroyed a great deal of the coast of Sumatra, displacing 40,000 people, injuring about 14,000, and killing 437. This eruption destroyed part of the island. Just like its predecessor, this was the cause of the tsunami, and has been rebuilding itself ever since. Thank you for listening. We'd also like to thank our History with the Szilagyis Patreon patrons, Ed Chinevere, Lord Dull, Kris Hill, and Susan Capuzzi-De Clerck. Their contributions help us to have the time to research and write what you're hearing. You can help us just like they do with a monthly subscription at patreon.com/historywiththeszilagis. Also, thank you to Mark White for the great show art and Zach Tripp for the awesome closing music. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast player, and don't forget to rate and review us there as well. And while you're at it, check out the rest of the great shows on the BQN Collective. We'd also love to hear what you think. If you'd like to reach out, you can find our network on Twitter at BQN Podcasts, and this podcast in particular at History Szilagyi. You can also talk about any and all of the BQN podcasts in our Facebook group, the BQN Collective. And last but not least, you can find me on Twitter at The Goddess Livia. That's TheGoddessLivia.
And me at Jason Dark Elf. We'd love to hear topic suggestions. What would you like to learn on Caffeinated History?